Hey, everybody, I'm here with Cheryl Jones.
Hey.
You know what? I was thinking recently, there have been a lot of movies that have influenced me.
Have there?
Yeah. If only there was a podcast that I could go on and talk about those movies that have influenced me most. What are your thoughts on this?
If only there was. Wait, I have one. I have Movies Made Me podcast, where we talk about the 5 movies that have influenced you to be who you are.
This sounds great. So you sit down every other week with a different guest and you dive into the 5 movies that were most influential for their lives.
Yes, anything that's really influenced them to be who they are.
This is great. How do people listen?
They can listen at mmmpodcast.com, iTunes, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, and Google Play Music.
You heard it here, folks. Tune in. It's the greatest mystery in literary history. A divisive question with highly contested answers. Who was the writer behind the pen name William Shakespeare? Welcome to Don't Quill the Messenger. Here's your host, Stephen Sable.
Welcome back, Quiller Nation. Here we are, another great episode of your favorite Shakespeare authorship podcast, Don't Quill the Messenger. Before I welcome our guest today, I would like to conduct a little bit of business. You know, you've all been hearing me talk about signing up at our Patreon page to support the show, but I really want to encourage you all to sign up at the Serial Quiller level so you can access the incredible bonus content we have been creating over the past few months. And don't forget, this month's bonus feature is a full dramatic reading of Venus and Adonis featuring 3 classically trained voices delivering this very sexy, very edgy poem that is specifically connected to the Shakespeare authorship question and indeed the very beginning of the use of the pseudonym William Shakespeare. Don't forget that patrons at select levels are entered into the Quiller of the Month contest, and our monthly winner receives an item of their choosing from the Quiller Swag Shop and a shout out on the show. Later in the program, our own producer Jake will announce this month's winner. Don't forget to visit the swag shop and get yourself some awesome merchandise to show off your Quiller pride. Jake assures me that new items are also on the way, designed specifically for members of the Quiller Nation. Do you have an idea for an item we should be offering? Do you have an idea for a future episode? Are you interested in being a guest on the show? Send me an email with your comments and suggestions to contact@don'tquillthepodcast.com. Contact@don'tquillthepodcast.com. Listener and former guest John Foss sent me a suggestion to get a historian and a fellow podcast host by the name of Dr. Samuel Biaghetti on the show. Sam has delved into the Shakespeare authorship question from a historian's perspective. He has a PhD in history. He posted a great YouTube video about his findings, and he'll be joining me soon for a future episode. So thank you for that suggestion, John. Listener Dawn Barron, you're out there, I know. Dawn contacted me recently to share her joy at the recent Blair Murphy episode and to gently chide me for interrupting Blair mid-sentence when we were discussing Blanquerna and Raymond Lull. Blair, if you're listening, Dawn wants you to finish the sentence that I cut you off at about 45 minutes into the episode. So we'll get that for you, Dawn, I promise. Right now, ladies and gentlemen, let's go ask some questions. My guest today is an accomplished barrister, former Who Wrote Shakespeare Video Contest top prize winner, fellow thespian, and now playwright and producer of her own one-woman show about her journey into the Shakespeare authorship question and Oxfordian positions. Her work was recently accepted to the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, where she will perform for audiences there and help educate people about the SAQ through an entertaining performance. Go figure, what a novel concept. She is a lady after my own heart. Returning to the program today, once again, and all the way from Ireland, is our friend Rosemary Laughlin. Rosemary, welcome back, and thanks for taking the time to be here through what must be a whirlwind busy schedule for you right now.
Thank you, Stephen. It's great to be back here again and speaking with you. And yeah, it is really hectic. And just to clarify a small thing, in Ireland, we have a distinction in for lawyers. You can be a barrister or a solicitor. Now, barrister it speaks in court, and they're trained specifically to do that. And then we have another system for so-called solicitors who deal directly with clients. And I'm actually a solicitor, but I understand you don't have that distinction over in the States.
We do not, and I was trying to be clever by using the barrister term, and so thank you for setting me straight. Now I know there's a difference between a barrister and a solicitor. Over here, they're just all lawyers to us.
They're all lawyers. Yeah. But yeah, it's a hectic time, Stephen, because I'm juggling work and then I'm preparing for the show, which will be in Edinburgh from the 15th to the 28th of August. And it's a dream come true. I'm still pinching myself, and even like this evening now I'm getting everything packed because I'm flying out to Edinburgh tomorrow, and it's just so exciting.
So as people are listening to this, you'll be in Edinburgh, because this episode will be dropping in about a week or so. So people will be listening to this while you are there performing the show. And how exciting is that?
Yeah, I mean, it's great to get this little boost from yourself on the podcast before the show. I'm actually going over, as I said, tomorrow, which is Monday. I'm there for a week before I put on the show. So that's just to settle in, to see other shows, because I'm going over on my own. I don't have my director coming with me. So I think it's important to kind of settle in and get the vibe of the place before launching into the full run of the show.
Well, I've never been. It's such a world-renowned fringe festival, and actors across the globe are familiar with it and know how exciting and how popular it is, and what a privilege and awesome achievement for you to be accepted and earn a spot there at the Fringe. But I do know those who have attended in the past, and one of the great joys of being there is to see the work of all your fellow actors who are there, and directors and playwrights. And, it's a wonderful place to experience new work and work that has been happening in different places across the globe that has garnered some attention. So I can understand wanting to spend as much time there as you possibly can for your own show and to see some shows while you're there as well.
Exactly. I think it truly is a fringe festival. It's actually non-curated. So the main burden is finding a venue that will accept you. And there is a lot of competition for that. But because you don't have, I suppose, a board deciding what shows get in and what don't, you really have a true mix of every caliber, of every standard. You people who are just beginning, and you've very well seasoned performers as well. So that's what makes it so special. I think there's something for everyone.
There is a similar version that happens in Hollywood every year. And when I had my theater in the North Hollywood Arts District, we participated and were involved in the Hollywood Fringe Festival on a regular basis. And at one point, I was a critic for the festival and wrote for LA Stage Times about the festival. And it's a wonderful, exciting time when all these performers are getting together, and you could see, 12, 15 shows in a 3-day period, because the performance schedule is just, filled and loaded. And you would watch some of these performers too. They'd get 15 minutes between the show that just left the theater and their show coming in and having to set up and be ready for curtain time. And then as soon as they were done with their show, they had 15 minutes to get it down and out because the next group was waiting in line behind them. I'm not sure if the Edinburgh Festival is similar in construct, but tell us a little bit of insight about the venue that you've acquired and what the ins and outs are going to be like for you getting your show up and ready.
Yeah, it's actually kind of similar to what you described there for the Hollywood Festival, Stephen. You book a slot and it's quite tight. And, you have to be very specific as to the time period for which you're booking the theatre, and you're paying more money for an extra 5 minutes or an extra 10 minutes. So I booked 2 hours. My show is for 1 hour and 50 minutes with a 15-minute interval. So The reason I chose my venue was back in January, I felt I really wanted the show was ready now. I had it nearly written at that stage, and I knew I wanted to put on in the Edinburgh Fringe. And they have this great, I suppose, outreach where on YouTube, the festival would interview various people about what you need to do to get into the Edinburgh Fringe. And one of the interviews that they had on the YouTube channel was Meet the Venues. And they had a range of different venues. And one of the venues I just really, I suppose I really liked the two girls who were being interviewed with regard to that venue. And I emailed them afterwards, and I, filled out all the application form, said what my show was about, etc. And I actually got accepted. So I was thrilled. I was like, that's brilliant. I don't have to, go around and try 20 or 30 different venues. It worked out very well.
That's incredible and very exciting. How many actual performances are you going to be able to deliver?
So I'm delivering 13 performances in total over a 2-week period. I have one day off, and it'll be from 7 o'clock to 10 to 9 at night, which I think is a nice time period. It's not too late, and I think people can go to dinner then before or afterwards. The thing about my show, I suppose, what I was worried about is it's kind of a balance between things I've discovered, and there's also a lot of information, because as you imagine, Stephen, if I'm talking about Edward de Vere, I have to give some background context. So my one fear with the show was it's not the kind of show that you can arrive in after 3 or 4 glasses of wine and be able to absorb everything. So I think with that time slot, I should be okay. People can go for a drink afterwards and absorb everything that needs to be absorbed during the show.
It cracks me up that you actually thought of that, and that's really funny, but it's probably very true. It is a celebratory atmosphere around these theater festivals, and because it is fringe, there's also there tends to be a certain number of productions and performances that are very edgy or avant-garde or irreverent in their humor, and people do tend to imbibe a little bit throughout the day and going from theater to theater. So it's interesting that you thought of that ahead of time, and awesome that you were able to get such a great time slot that you're not, performing at midnight or at, 4 p.m, because there are certain shows that's the only time slots they end up getting, isn't it?
It is, yeah. I was lucky. I was able to click on my preferences for a time slot, and I was lucky then to get that time slot.
Yeah, that's exciting. That's great. I mean, you're that's a prime time main stage show slot that you have. And I think that's going to bode well for your audience numbers. And 13 performances, you're going to be doing basically a Broadway schedule for 2 weeks. Broadway does 8 shows, 7 or 8 shows a week, and they only take Mondays off. You're going to be like a Broadway actress now for the next 2 weeks.
Well, what I really feel is that I'm going to really know what it's like, to be an actor, at the end of those 2 weeks, to go through, I suppose, all the ups and downs, the kind of analysis, post-show analysis that you have, trying to feed my energy levels in the right manner so that the energy balance is right for when I'm performing the show. And it'll be a baptism of fire for someone like me, because, I do have an office job generally, and this will be very different. So I'll certainly know what it feels like at the end of it, I'm sure. Absolutely.
So tell us a little bit about the journey of creating the piece, what your writing process was. And then I'd like to talk to you a little bit about, how you chose a director to help you fashion it and what the rehearsal process was like in getting it ready for performance.
Yes. So in around 2015, Stephen, I had been an Oxfordian for around 3 years at that stage. I had read the main books that we're all familiar with. I'd signed up to the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship and to the De Vere Society. And I was getting more and more interested in the Earl of Oxford. And it had got to the stage where I felt I wanted to contribute as well, rather than just reading the amazing work of the various scholars that we're all familiar with. I wanted to go on my own little adventure. And what I decided to do was, I suppose what called to me really more than what I decided to do, what called to me was I wanted to go and walk on the ground where Edward de Vere trod. I wanted to feel his connection with the place. So those places where he was born, where he died, where he lived, where he travelled to, I wanted to walk that path and say to myself, okay, Edward de Vere was here. And I started off in 2015 and I went to Hackney, where Edward lived at the time of his death. And it started off from there, and then I went to other places in London. I went to the site of Fisher's Folly. Then I went to where he was born in Castle Hedingham, and then I went out to Italy as well. But I had no intention of writing about this at all. I just purely wanted to do it for myself and see how that would inspire me in my thinking of Oxford. But I'd no plan to write it into a play or a one-woman show. And what happened after a few of those trips was that I realised I'm having an adventure here. There were some wonderful little things that happened along the way, so much so that I thought, gosh, I should write that down. That's ripe material for a one-woman show. And I suppose what gave me the confidence to do that is because I've had very lucky, I've had a lot of acting training. So I knew that I'd be able to perform it myself. I wouldn't be writing it for someone else to perform it. And I knew that only I could perform it, really, because it was myself that was experiencing it. So it was about, I'd say, 2017 that I thought I'll create something here in the form of a one-woman show, knitting together the experiences that I had. And what I was planning to do at the time then, Stephen, was to also talk about in the show some of the themes that we're all familiar with that arise in Shakespeare. So themes of disguise, themes of jealousy. And I was going to look at Shakespeare's plays and compare how those issues arose in Edward de Vere's life and how they're reflected in Shakespeare's plays. But then what happened was I realised it was all getting unwieldy and too long. And it dawned on me that there's so much material from my own personal journeys to these places that's all I need to write about in the show. So it was about 2018, 2019 that I decided that I would stick purely to my own personal journey. I suppose with writing then, I had a little bit of fear because I do write for a living, but it's in a legal capacity. And I'd never written, I suppose, what would be described as a memoir. You could describe what I'm writing as memoir, performative memoir. And I'd never done that before. So I was obviously a bit apprehensive. I'd never done it before. But I think the whole process of writing, I would literally write down everything that happened. I'd read back over it. It would read terribly, like something a 10-year-old child would write. And I kept refining it and refining it and refining it. And, it could be 10 minutes a day, 20 minutes a day, at the weekends a little bit more. But it was amazing what slowly emerged out of that process.
That's a fantastic process. And I love the fact that you share how long the process has been. And, I think it's encouraging to people out there who have thought about creating their own projects. And a number of my guests, when I have them on and I ask them about, their work, whether it's a novel, your playwriting, other projects that guests have talked about, it truly is one of those things that I hope inspires people that it does take time, and it's okay for it to take time, especially if it's something you're passionate about and that you want it to be good. And so I'm thrilled with you sharing that aspect of this journey. I wonder, how long was it? What I'm getting at is what did it take to edit it down to a sizable piece that wasn't too long and, overblown with too much text or too much information?
A lot of that would have come from the writing process itself. And me, what I find very helpful, Stephen, when I'm writing is I read it out loud when I've written it. And because I have been trained in performance, I have a sense as to what works and what doesn't work. So a lot of the refining happened with me simply going back over what I had written and saying, okay, this isn't feeling right in my body now. There's a little bit too much explication here. The audience is going to maybe, get a bit tired. I need to move in another direction. And I'd say the bulk of the refining process was done that way. And then when I put it on its feet and worked with my director, he had a few other suggestions. Now, Stephen, when I went to Andrew, my director, for the first rehearsal, the first thing I said to Andrew was, Andrew, it's written, it's done. I'm not changing a single word. And Andrew,
playwrights who want their work produced, they always tell the director, "Don't mess with my work."
It's so funny because Andrew just kind of nodded sagely, and he clearly knows how to deal with people like me. But over the course of the rehearsals, then he would just make very subtle points. Maybe, do you really need this bit, Rosemary? And I ended up, I'd say, agreeing with 99.9% of what he suggested. So there were some further cuts that happened, in the rehearsal process.
Well, I think everyone needs a second set of eyes, whether it's, writing, like you say, professionally, legally, you want somebody to look at what you've done. How many of us have written something, even something simple, and looked at it and looked at it and looked at it and missed that one typo that we looked at 18 times. And then some other set of eyes comes along and says, oh, you're missing a letter here, or you have a word inverted there, or whatever. We all need copy editors at the very minimum, but as artists, I think we also need informed and educated eyes just to make sure, especially a piece that's so personal, that we're not indulging our own egos, or that we're not, getting too down into the weeds of personal experience that's not reading well from an audience perspective. And so it sounds like you had a great partner there who could help you, sort of refine it from a performance perspective rather than a literary perspective.
Absolutely. Yeah. Myself and Andrew worked very well. He's actually a friend of mine, Stephen. We first met in a play in 2009, and we've been friends ever since. We go to the theatre a lot. And I knew from, when we go to the theatre and when we talk about various plays, Andrew always has very interesting insights. And I knew that he had that, I suppose, intelligence to be able to look at my work and point out what would work best in terms of my performance of it.
And how did he feel about the Shakespeare authorship question prior to the two of you working on this project together? Was he interested in it at all? Did he have any background knowledge in it? Obviously, being your friend for so long, he'd had some exposure to it. But just out of curiosity, what was his position on it at the time that you brought this to him, and has it changed at all since working with you on this project? I wonder, just out of curiosity.
So he would have been, I suppose, a person who, would believe that it's the man from Stratford, because that's what we all initially believe before we, become exposed to the authorship question. And I suppose I did think about, when I was selecting my director, do I need someone to believe in my story? Or do I need someone who will just, be good at being a director? And I realized that the important thing was that Andrew would be a good director. And myself and Andrew, I would have, I suppose, told him some of my discoveries that I've made over the years. I would have talked to him about, the Brian Friel matters that I discovered in his play translations, etc. And Andrew would be, he'd listen and he'd ask questions, but he wouldn't necessarily give away his thoughts. And I suppose, Stephen, I wouldn't press him either. And the reason I wouldn't do that is that my friendships are really, really important to me. And it's not that I'd fall out with someone because they're not an Oxfordian, or they might turn around and say, oh, that's a load of rubbish. But for me, the important thing, and I think it's something that you were saying as well on one of your recent podcasts, you're kind of, you get to the stage where you're not really trying to convince people anymore. And the thing is that you don't know what is working in the back of somebody's head unconsciously. If you go out and be your best self, put your best foot forward, without having an agenda or proselytizing about something, you don't know what way that could be working on someone. So it's funny you should ask that, because I had another interview the other day with regard to the play. And I said to Andrew, Andrew, what if the interviewer asks me, have I managed to convince you that it's the Earl of Oxford that wrote the plays? And Andrew laughed and he said, they'll have to come and ask me that myself. They'll have to come directly and ask me that. So he wasn't giving anything away, and that's absolutely fine with me,
How very coy of him to keep his cards so close to his vest there. I love that. That's great. I might need to have you share his contact information with me so I can invite him to be a guest on the program. And, I didn't expect that you were going to say that you tried to convince him through this, or that you successfully convinced him through this process. I was just curious as to what you may have observed occurred with him with regards to this issue through working on a piece that is so obviously Oxfordian in nature. And that leads me to the next question is, I'm assuming that this has been, you've performed this to somebody. There have been audiences, at least test audiences or something at this point, no?
Well, I'm involved in a lovely Meisner group in Dublin that I did some training with them back in 2016 for a whole year. And I drop in every so often. So I did put parts of it onto the Meisner group, and it was very well received. But other than that, it's just been my director and my sister and a few neighbours who've witnessed it. So it'll all be very new going over to Edinburgh. It's
technically the world premiere of this new work.
It is, yeah, world premiere. And hopefully, Stephen, my dream is to bring it other places as well, and certainly bring it to Dublin, Cork is my hometown, but I'm living in Dublin. But I will be performing it as well in a place called Abbeyfeale. It's down on the border of Limerick and Kerry, and it's very close to where my father grew up. So I feel that's really wonderful that I happen to be able to put it on there, because my father would have read the Shakespeare sonnets, often of an evening. And I think a lot of my love of Shakespeare comes from my father. So that was lovely to be able to put it on there in September.
That's exciting. That is so super exciting. I envy you in so many ways as a fellow performer to have created this piece of art and now to be able to premiere it and perform it in front of audiences. And basically, it sounds like you're putting together a tour of your own creation of dates and locations that you will continue to share this with others. And I can't wait to hear from you about how audiences receive it. Along those lines, give us a little glimpse into how the piece flows. Where does it begin? What does it go through up until intermission? Why did you choose where you place intermission? Can you share some of that with us?
Yeah, sure. So I begin the piece with my own background, and I start as a very small child, my childhood exposure to Shakespeare and my parents interfacing with Shakespeare, and then obviously school. And I talk a little bit about law, studying law, and how that influenced my thinking, because first and foremost in one's brain as a lawyer is you're always looking for evidence, source evidence. And then I continue talking about my acting training. I was an adult. I was nearly 30 years of age before I went to my first acting class. I'd never done it as a child, but it was a revelation. It was something that really spoke to me. And it was in the course of that acting training that I came across a brilliant teacher called Andy Hines. He specifically is a teacher of Shakespeare, and he's written a brilliant book as well, Acting Shakespeare's Language. So I trained with Andy for nearly 8 years, Stephen, every week, once a week in the evening. And I covered so many monologues. So in the show, I write about that process of working with Andy. And then that takes about, I'd say, maybe half an hour. And I'm straight into then after having explained how I came across Oxfordianism through Laura and Lisa Wilson's film Last Will and Testament, I'm straight in then to going to the places associated with Edward de Vere. So the first act is places in London, which are, I had some extraordinary experiences in those places. And then there's a break, and I thought that was a nice place to break, because then after the first act, I go abroad, and I'm abroad anyway from Ireland when I go to England. But I suppose when I say abroad, I mean further afield. I go to Italy.
Sure.
So the Italian part is mainly in the second act.
When you visited Italy, was it one big long tour of seeing all the different Oxfordian locations, or did you go multiple times and have specific locations each time? Can you share a little bit about what led to this portion of the play?
So for me, because I live so close to Italy, it's a short flight, it's about 3 hours. I was able to break it up. I wouldn't have had, I suppose, financially, it would be a lot to go for 2 weeks. So by breaking it up, it's a lot more financially viable. But also, it means that you don't have to have all your research done at the one time. So my first port of call in Italy was Venice, because obviously that's where Edward de Vere spent most of his time. So at that stage, I'd have read Richard Rowe's book, Naomi Maygrie's book, and done a bit of research on the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship and De Vere Society websites about the places associated with Edward de Vere in Italy. So I had a sense of, where he would have visited in Italy, the churches he would have gone to, etc. And because it was my first time ever in Venice, Stephen, I said, I'm going to give myself the space to just enjoy myself as well. It's not going to be, 99% research on the Earl of Oxford. I'm just going to enjoy it. So I kind of make a little holiday out of it as well. I ended up going to Venice on 3 occasions. The third occasion was the occasion where I went to Villa Foscari, because the previous 2 occasions, it just wasn't open when I went there. And what I like to do when I'm researching or on the trail of Edward de Vere, I do research to a certain extent, but I don't want to research something to death. I like to leave a little bit of not sure what I'm going to do when I get there, and then a little bit of magic can happen. I don't plan my day out, rigorously. I have an idea, I'll go to this church today, or I might go to Villa Foscari, or go out to Padua, and where I might go in those places. But when you leave that bit of space, then all sorts of strange and wonderful things end up happening as well. So I ended up going to Italy, to Venice 3 times, and then I went to Mantua once, Padua once, Verona, I think I went there twice. But there's still other places, obviously, where Edward would have travelled to, such as Florence, and I've never been there, so I hope to get there as well.
My wife and I have twice planned 2-week vacations to Italy to visit a lot of these locations that you mentioned, and twice have had to cancel because we ended up having a pregnancy and we didn't want to take that journey with her 5 or 6 months pregnant. So we had to cancel both times. We have 2 beautiful daughters because of it. So we're okay. In fact, we named our second daughter Siena after the town in Italy, because it's one of the sites that we were planning to go to, because, it was one of Edward's favorite places in Italy. We are going to do it. We're doing it next year. We've decided there will be no more pregnancies in our lives. And next fall is our 10th wedding anniversary. So we are going next fall for 2 weeks. We're finally going to do the Edward de Vere tour of Italy. So I'll probably... Oh,
that's wonderful. You'll have a process.
I'll probably be contacting you on the side, asking you for travel tips that you can share. Obviously, I do have Richard Rowe's book, and that has been a great inspiration to some of the things that we have planned that we'd like to do. But I'll probably be hitting you up by email for some extra tips about places we should include and see, and even maybe places to stay. So we'll talk about that off air sometime.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps I'll get a chance to see your show, and I'll just steal right from your one-woman show the places that you talk about, and that's where I need to go and be and see and visit.
Well, I think I do hit the right places in the show, Stephen. So for the Italian trip, the main focus of the show are the trips to Villa Foscari, which we know as Portia's house. So Richard Rowe and Naomi Maiewski, who extensively researched the Italian connections in Shakespeare's plays, they both identified, as far as I know, independently, Villa Foscari as Portia's house, Belmont. So we know from The Merchant of Venice that Portia lives in a place called Belmont, and there were clues in the play, and Richard Rowe and Naomi Maiewski examined those very carefully, and I suppose they found the coordinates of Villa Foscari. So that is an incredible location. It is just mind-blowing, and I would recommend any Oxfordian to go, and even Shakespeare lover, anyone, to go and see it. It's on the UNESCO World Heritage Site list, and you can see why. It's got incredible frescoes, and including a fresco of Portia, which I saw there, and I wasn't aware of that there was a fresco of a Portia as well in Villa Foscari. The other, I suppose, main place in Italy that I would recommend you or any Oxfordian or Shakespearean lover to visit is the Church of Santa Maria delle Grazie. It's about 10 kilometres outside of Mantua, and it's where the great hero of Edward de Vere, the courtier and diplomat Baldassare Castiglione, is buried. And I wanted to go there because I had a sense that when Edward was in the area, now we don't have correspondence from Edward de Vere from Mantua, but it's obviously highly likely, almost certain, that he went there, given various references, such as the Giulio Romano references in the two long poems, Rape of Lucrece and Venus and Adonis. So it's almost certain that Edward did travel to Mantua, and I thought I really want to go, to that church as well, and that was an amazing experience to see that.
And you include that in your play, right? You talk about your experiences there, and that's part of what the whole second act is about then, yes?
It is, yeah. For me, what was so special about going to the Church of Santa Maria della Grazia is that we have the tomb of Baldassare Castiglione, and there's a beautiful sculpture on that tomb done by Giulio Romano. And his paintings then are also referenced in Shakespeare. His graphic series of the Trojan War, that series in the Ducal Palace in Mantua, and his paintings of the horses. But and we always laugh at it, from an Oxfordian point of view, this whole notion that Shakespeare didn't know Italy well, and he makes various errors, and that shows that he obviously picked it up in the pub and got it wrong. And one of the things that we're told that Shakespeare got wrong is that Giulio Romano is a painter, and whereas Shakespeare refers to Giulio Romano as a sculptor in The Winter's Tale, in the context of Hermione's, him doing up Hermione's statue. And what I found so funny about that is that there is actually a statue, of done by Giulio Romano, of the risen Christ on top of Baldassare Castiglione's tomb. And for me, what's so extraordinary about that is that in the play The Winter's Tale, Hermione, there's a statue of her finished off by Giulio Romano. And at the end of the play, Hermione, the statue comes to life. So we can see that as Hermione rising from the dead. It's a resurrection image. And the statue that that is done by Giulio Romano on the tomb of Baldassare Castiglione. That's a statue of the risen Christ. Now, it's the most glorious thing I've ever seen, Stephen. I'm living in Ireland. I was brought up in Catholic Ireland. I used to seeing statues all my life. As a child, every Sunday there were statues in the church. You go to school, there's a statue in the classroom. You go to a relative, they have a statue. So religious iconography is very much a part of, what I've grown up with. And I went along to the church of Santa Maria della Grazia thinking, oh yeah, there's some statue. I was blown away by it. It was a deeply affecting piece. It was just the talent, it affected me, and I did not expect to be affected by a statue. And I said to myself, I can see why, if Edward de Vere, which I'm convinced he did actually stand there and look at that statue, I can see why he was so moved by it and how that bled into his art, and Hermione's statue came to life.
Well, it occurs to me that, especially, when you read the books about Shakespeare and Italy, and you look at it, and one of the things about Richard Rowe's book is it doesn't truly go across the line into Oxfordianism. It just really talks about how whoever wrote the plays must have visited these locations and must have known what was happening at these locations at that time and traveled these roads and in many cases these canals, which is a very effective part of the book for me, is the amount of barge travel that had to have occurred back then at that time, and some of those canals that are no longer existing, but that would have been used by travelers, especially when you talk about, between Milan and Venice and that whole stretch and all those places that are mentioned, Verona, Padua, as you talked about. But I think the most compelling aspect of it is indeed these works of art that still exist, that are still there, that we can go view and understand, as you say, how impactful they were and what an impression they made on the writer. And that's why they become parts of his writing, is because great art inspires more great art. And I think that's one of the things we can learn from the works of Shakespeare, is they are filled with inspiration from other artists, and not just painters, but sculptors and even musicians and composers, because look how much music there is in the Shakespeare canon. So here was, a guy who absolutely loved every form of art, was absolutely inspired by the greats and had exposure to the greats. There's no doubt.
Absolutely, Stephen. And one of the things that really struck me as well is that when I was on this journey, I was aware that Edward de Vere would have been exposed to Ovid's Metamorphoses when he was a small boy, or sorry, at least when he was in William Cecil's house, when what's his name, Arthur Golding, when he was there translating Ovid's Metamorphoses. So we know that Edward, as a teenager, was heavily exposed to Ovid's Metamorphoses, and then to go to Villa Foscari and see frescoes, which are, they're still incredibly vibrant. Yes, they are a little bit tired after 450 plus years.
Right. And that's the other thing we have to remember, is Edward saw them 400 years ago when they probably looked a lot better than they look now. And they're still inspiring, right?
They blew me away, Stephen. So could you imagine what they would have looked like to someone coming from England with all its stultifying atmosphere and being cracked down upon for, criticising the Queen's marriage situation, to come from that to a place like Italy, to see these frescoes freshly painted, more or less, at that stage, and to have them depict Ovid's scenes, and to be already familiar with Ovid, so that you could have the context then of seeing the vibrant imagery of what was already in your imagination. Can you imagine how that would have impacted on Edward de Vere? It's just extraordinary. And you're right, it's the multiple art sources. It's not just writing, it's not just one thing. And he was brilliant at appreciating or practicing all of those arts. We know that he was apparently an excellent musician as well. And he was able to weave in his writing, I think, references to multiple art forms in a really subtle, extraordinary way.
Well, and also, you know, when I talk about my wife and I planning our trip for next year, you know, we're going to do the best we can with it financially, but we're no Earl or Lord of Oxford. And so you think about like how much money he had to spend and the way he could travel and the sights that he could see and the letters of introduction he had and the access to places that you and I could never gain access because we're not the 17th Earl of Oxford. And it's no wonder he spent so much time there and traveled the country practically from top to bottom. And it's no wonder that the only reason he came home was under demand and threat of the Queen, who said, you need to get your rear end home right now. Otherwise, I believe he may have just stayed there forever.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say he certainly had a deep affinity, and that's very much clearly reflected in his writings. It stayed with him for the rest of his life. And obviously then we know he came back and he was known as the Italianate gentleman, and he had the clothes and the look. He really borrowed from Italy, I think.
Well, and you know, and that's a true fact. And some people who are still grasping their minds around the whole Shakespeare authorship question, I think the Italian connection is one of the strongest arguments and one of the strongest points that Oxfordians can make, especially when we talk about these aspects that you mentioned that Stratfordians tend to point at and criticize their own man as having gotten things about Italy wrong because they're trying to figure out a way to justify why there are 13 plays set in Italy and why there's so many details about Italy in all these plays for a guy that they can't prove ever left England. So, it becomes one of those catch-22s for them where they can't explain it, so they try to explain it away. And I think that that's one of our strongest positions and has been for over 100 years, one of the strongest positions. And I think that it's one that when I talk to people about who really love the works, many of the people I know who really love the works really love some of those Italian plays. And when you start cracking it open and you start explaining to them what is included in there and the references that are there, that makes it very clear to them that whoever wrote those plays was there, stood in those spots and was exposed to that culture at that time. And there's no other way that they could have written this wonderful work.
Indeed. And I think that is very clear to anyone who sits down and reads Richard Rowe's book. It's very clear that the person had to be there.
And I'm thrilled that you've had that personal part of your own journey through this and that you've included that in your play. And I can't wait to hear from you about how audiences are going to respond and receive this work and how many questions it's going to force them to ask themselves after, witnessing your performance. I do have to ask you, though, are you prepared for how you'll feel or respond if you have people walk out because they're so ingrained in the Stratfordian mythology and you have questioned and tested them and they just can't handle it? I mean, do you think that might happen?
I suppose it's a fear that any person doing a show like mine, about the Earl of Oxford, would have. We all know the labels that come towards us: conspiracy theorists, heretic, all this kind of stuff. I am hopeful that it won't happen, Stephen, because I think now it's I'm judging my own work, but I think I've got the right balance. There's a lot of humour. There's a lot of my own incredulity. When I first heard of the Shakespeare authorship question, I was shocked that this wasn't being discussed. And when I'm giving information about the Earl of Oxford, It is in kind of, I suppose, little pithy snippets here and there. It's not in any way, I hope anyway, it's not in any way lecture-like or in any way kind of having some kind of a moral high ground and saying this is the case. And, it's very much, the whole play is a journey of discovery, and I'm living in that journey of discovery. So I think as an audience member watching that, it would be kind of hard to walk out, because it wouldn't have that energy of attacking a person's belief about it.
That's great. That's super important, I think. And, and I've obviously, because of my own theater background and the host of this series, I've had exposure to a lot of work by a lot of people that is dramatic in nature, some better than others. And the ones that I feel that are the best works are the ones, as you say, that, are not beating people over the head with the message, but sort of introducing them to the ideas in a very entertaining and often humorous way. And I have long believed that this is a key to changing the paradigm. I believe, we all know, and I have had wonderful guests whom I have tremendous amount of respect for and the amount of research that they've done, but it's hard to convince somebody who is new to this to go read a giant volume of research or a huge book that's been written about it. You sort of, it's like enjoying wine. People refer to white Zinfandel as like an introductory wine, rosés, blushes, until finally you can work your way up through the Merlots, the Pinots, and into something like a real rich Zinfandel. And I think that we need more of the blush in what we're doing. And I think the blush is the stuff that's entertaining, that is humorous and fun and lighter and not so dense with details and people who have 5 titles and trying to understand how the titles all work. And you know what I mean? And so I'm super excited that there is a group of Oxfordians, yourself included, who are now delving into this and creating, whether it's, a one-woman show or I've been privy to a piece that's 3 people, like a narrator who is sort of the referee between Stratford and Oxford, and that's a fun piece, and I'm hoping to talk to the writer of that piece in a future episode. As you may be aware, and I know most listeners are aware, I'm traveling very soon to New York to work with Hank Whittemore. He has his one-man show, and we're going to be working on converting that into a piece that any actor can perform so that it's not so personal to him and his experience. It sounds like yours would be impossible to do that because yours is so personal and so anecdotal. But Hank and I are going to work on his piece and see if we can't make it something more universally producible, because I believe that is our secret. I think we need to take a page off of our own guy's book. How did he convince his world of anything? He wrote a play and produced it and made sure it was performed. That's how. His works are some of the greatest propaganda ever. We need to steal from that idea and be producing entertaining content that helps convince people to our cause.
Exactly. And Edward de Vere, no doubt, he had such fun writing those plays and sending up the various characters in the court that are referred to in the plays and, putting them on. Can you imagine, planning a production back then? And I feel that when you do something and you really enjoy it, it doesn't really matter then whether people may or may not be convinced as to your argument. And I really learned that, I think, Stephen, in writing this. Anytime I felt that I'm veering a little bit too much into kind of educating the audience, I pull back and I was like, no, I can't. No one play can do justice to The Extraordinary Life of Edward de Vere. So I can't tell the audience everything I want to tell them about Edward de Vere. All I can do is bring the joy that I had in that discovery. And there are little nuggets of extraordinary episodes from his life that, would likely spark the interest of anyone with an open and curious mind. So I think that's right. That's the way to go about it.
One of the things I'm curious about with regards to your production is the production elements. Are you going to be costumed? Do you have a certain number of props? Is there any kind of set or scenery, lighting effects, anything like that? What did you decide when it came to like production values for this piece?
Well, the simple answer is that it's very basic, Stephen, and it's literally something that I can travel and pack in a bag, apart from 2 set pieces. So I have a number of props. One of the things myself and Andrew worked out in the course of the rehearsal process, Andrew suggested having some kind of imagery. And because, I didn't have any budget at all and just using my own funds for this, we decided, well, what can I do cheaply? And we have in the show various pictures, which are photographs maybe that I took, or images of the Drushout engraving, images of Edward de Vere, and they really, I think, complement the play very well. So I have a few set pieces that are kind of large that I have to post separately. I can't bring them in my luggage, but literally everything else I can bring in my suitcase. And I do, in the piece, have various excerpts from Shakespeare monologues that I worked on over the years when I was participating in Andy's class, and they're very much knitted into the story that I'm telling. And for each monologue, I put on a little different prop. So what I'm wearing on stage is very simple. It's just black, and then for each monologue, I have a different little prop, and that really helps the monologue then to stand out, and the audience can see for definite, for sure she's doing a monologue there. It's something, something a bit different. So we've kept them very simple and quite fun as well, Stephen. I mean, when you see the production eventually, you'll see that I'm not taking certain aspects of it too seriously. I'm having a bit of fun with it as well.
Oh, that's great. I love the fact that, it's sort of, old school have trunk will travel type of aspect, right? You've got your giant carpet bag and you just pull out your little pieces that you need, your little bag of tricks, right? I think that sounds very entertaining, especially if you're, as you say, very, irreverent about it, and just changing hats, for instance. It's almost like an improv exercise happening in front of our eyes then, isn't it? And I think that can be very effective for audiences, especially if you make them laugh. What there's that famous thing, make them laugh, and that's the key.
Exactly, yeah. And it's funny because for my little props that I use for the monologues, I have them all in a suitcase, which I bring on stage. And I thought that was a nice idea because the suitcase, it also symbolises me travelling to the places of Edward de Vere. So you can actually get from certain props, you can get more than one use out of them. You can, have multiple imagery going on with the one prop. So there's a few things that we're trying to do with that as well for the piece.
Do you have stickers all over your suitcase of all the places that you visited? Does it have that kind of, old school travel look to it?
No, it doesn't. It's this suitcase that I really like, and it's a nice leather, and I don't want to mess it up by covering it with stickers.
Okay, so there won't be any stickers of Mantua on the outside of your suitcase.
No, but now you're getting me thinking, Stephen, maybe I should make a further adjustment. It's so funny because you think that a play is finished and there's always something different that you can do, and you get ideas from everywhere, from everyone, or even walking down the street you might get an idea. So I could well find that my play looks a little bit different at the end of the 2 weeks of the Edinburgh run.
Oh, I'm certain of that. And, I don't know why, but just when you mentioned that you carry the suitcase on stage, what I saw in my mind was this old fashioned, 1950s, 1960s style suitcase that has stickers all over it from all the places that you visited, that you then refer to in your play. I don't know. That's what visually where my brain went to. So that's why I asked that question.
Yeah.
So maybe, I don't know, maybe I just gave you a little idea.
I think you did, Stephen. Thank you.
Tell us about one of the props that you use for one of the monologues that's included, that is one of your favorite moments.
Well, there are so many. I suppose for one of the monologues, Stephen, most of them are female monologues, but one of them is a monologue by Mark Antony from the play Julius Caesar, and he's mourning the body of Julius Caesar. And it's a really strong kind of masculine energy monologue. And, it takes, I suppose, a certain adjustment. But what I decided to do for that was because Mark Antony, he's kind of, a Roman general army type person. I chose a khaki shirt. And it's funny because I got it in a store, a discount store. It was reduced and it was perfect, except I think it was a kind of a Ralph Lauren logo. And I said, I can't have Mark Antony going on stage, being Mark Antony with a Ralph Lauren logo. So what I did was I went to a charity shop and I bought a T-shirt that had a star, a 5-point star. And I brought it to the tailor and I asked them to cut the star out of the T-shirt and to embroider it onto the shirt. So when I'm delivering that speech by Mark Antony, the 5-point star is there and it's covering my heart, and it almost feels like there's that element of asking Edward de Vere, help me with this monologue, help me descend into that masculine energy for this piece. And then another prop, Stephen, that I have is my dad, when he used to read Shakespeare sonnets when I was a child, he had this ancient, it was an ex-library book, and it's an old green book. And I use that on stage as well. And again, just looking at that, it fills my heart because my dad had such a love for Shakespeare. And a third prop, I'm telling you about all my props now. A third prop I have is that I, as I mentioned, I wear black, but I have this beautiful belt that my mum gave me as a present. My mum has passed away now, Stephen, but 20 years ago, my mum and her sister, they went on a little holiday to Florence. And my mum came back with a beautiful leather belt as a present for me. And it's got a rose buckle. And then it's got these kind of roses imprinted on the leather. And it's multifaceted, the impact that belt has. It's a prop in the sense that it mirrors the name of the show, a rose by any other name. And it also has a piece of my mum, who I refer to in the play as well. I talk about my relationship with my parents in the play. And then that belt, mum bought it in Florence for Edward travel to. So anything that I have as a prop, I have thought about it, and I'm very much of the belief that if a prop doesn't really speak to you, it shouldn't be on the stage.
I so agree with that, and I commonly tell actors that the thing about props is you need to be connected to them. You need to really know your prop. I commonly say props hate people. And inanimate objects will come to life on stage in the presence of an audience and do anything they can to steal the show from the actor if possible. A gun will notoriously fail to fire. A sword will notoriously break. Things just happen. Props come to life and end up doing crazy things. And I always say to actors, the best way to make sure your prop doesn't steal the show from you is you need to make it your friend. And the way that we make friends is by spending time together. So spend time with your props, get to know them, work with them, make them your friend, and they will help enhance your performance rather than detract. And it sounds like you've specifically chosen longtime friends to share the stage with you for this production.
Yes, certainly some longtime friends, and a few new friends as well. That are that work. I hope they work. Let's say I'm taking a risk with them, Stephen. There are certain props, and they could go horribly wrong, or they could go very right. And I love that as well. I love that element of, okay, we'll try that with that, and let's see what happens.
Well, I think audiences who enjoy live theater, that's one of the reasons that they enjoy live theater, is there is always that potential that anything can happen. And sometimes does. Those of us who've been involved in live productions, we all have thousands of stories we could tell about a prop going wrong, or a set having a problem, or a costume issue, or, someone missing a cue or going up on stage. Or, that's part of the magic of live theater is, pressing through some of those things as well. And I always find audiences are extremely forgiving of that kind of thing because it's part of the experience. Live theater is one of the few forms of art where the artist and the audience are having a mutually shared experience at the exact same time. A painter paints and then people come look at it sometimes hundreds of years later, as we've talked about just in this episode. But an actor's work is fleeting in that moment. And especially when it's, with that live audience, and every audience brings their own energy to the room as well, And so I think that that's the beauty and magic of live theater. And it's one of the reasons why we all love it so much.
Exactly, Stephen.
I once produced a production of Romeo and Juliet, and Romeo and Juliet went for their kiss right before he's supposed to climb down from the balcony, and their costumes hooked together and they couldn't get them apart. The eyelets on her dress and the hooks on his doublet had connected while they embraced, and they couldn't get apart, and he couldn't leave the stage. And it seemed like it took forever, but just even a few moments of that can feel like forever. And of course the audience burst out in laughter. There was nothing else you could do. The poor actors were trying not to laugh, but eventually they got themselves unhooked and went on with the story. We went to the costumer and fixed the problem so it didn't happen again. But yeah, these things can happen sometimes.
Exactly. And as you say, that is the joy of live theatre, and that will never happen on a film or on a Netflix. It'll only happen in live theatre. And it's human, Stephen, isn't it? Because, if we see an actor a little bit nervous, we're a bit nervous too. And the reason we're nervous is because we feel for them as human beings. Our energies are being shared, with each other. And it really brings our humanity to the fore, I think, attending the theatre. And that's why it's such a beautiful, vital art force. And we should always do everything we can to keep theatre alive.
Without the quality of empathy, there could not be theatre. It is what we feed on as actors, is the empathy of the audience, and it is what the audience brings to the room when they sit and watch the play. And, I always say to actors, our number one goal is to cause the audience to feel something. And if we can do that, we win. And it sounds like you're right on your way to making 13 rooms full of people feel something. And I hope that what they feel is an empathy for you, as well as a sense of curiosity once the play is over, and that they'll go and do some research and ask their own questions about this topic after they witness what you're going to share with them.
Exactly. And you say, Stephen, room filled with people. That's the one thing one has no control over. So what I'm going to do is, I've got a week in Edinburgh prior to the show, And I'm going to use that week for flyering. Now, not the whole day flyering, handing out my flyers for the show, but it would be great to get a good audience, because it really affects you as a performer if you have, a decent number in the audience. And Robin Phillips has very kindly, the lady who has made the film about the Earl of Oxford, she has very kindly gifted me 2 lovely outfits of Elizabethan costume. And I'm going to wear them in the streets of Edinburgh. So I'm hoping that might arouse people's curiosity as well. Why is this person dressed up in Elizabethan costume?
I have found, I don't know if you have time for this or what your plans are or what the size of your flyers are, but, in my experience, I have found that 4x6 postcards are more effective than 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper. And it's because they're a smaller size. They're easier for people to put into a pocket or into a purse, rather than an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, which tends to end up needing to be folded if people want to keep it. And so you might want to consider that. When I had my theater in LA, and even now with my new Shakespeare company here in Southern Oregon, we do 4x6 postcards you can print on both sides with all the information that you need people to have. And they're just so easy to hand to people or for stores to keep on the counter right where the register is, where people check out. They're much more accessible that way, and it's easier to convince stores to put a little stack there on their counter because they don't take up as much space. And so you might want to consider that.
Well, it's funny, Stephen, because when I first heard about flyers for that I'd have to be doing flyering and all of that for Edinburgh, I assumed that the flyers would be those kind of long ones that were traditionally the case. But when the spec came in, it was actually the spec that you referred to. I think it's 4 inches by 6, and it kind of slips into your handbag. And as you say, they're much easier to put on, a coffee shop counter. They look a lot better, and you don't have to kind of fold them over. So I agree, and it's a great idea.
Well, it sounds like those people over in Edinburgh know what they're doing then. I should have figured that after that festival is so famous, I should have figured they had some sort of pointers or hints or tips that they give to the different producers of different shows. I don't think that our listeners understand, though, and it's great that you've shared that, because you have to pay attention to what you're hearing here, Quiller Nation. Rosemary wrote this piece, put it all together. She is her own prop mistress. She's her own costumer. She is the producer. She had to find the venue. And now she is also the marketing and public relations director for her show. The only thing she didn't do was direct it herself. And that's smart, because she obviously, as she told us, found a very qualified director to help her stage the play. But you're wearing a lot of hats in addition to the ones that you might put on in the middle of the performance.
Well, one of the hats, fortunately, that I don't have to wear is the PR hat vis-a-vis the media. So again, I was very lucky, Stephen, to work with a brilliant PR representative, Conall Kennedy, and he did a brilliant press release, and he has sent it out to many media outlets. Now, obviously, they're deluged with press releases for shows, whether it be Edinburgh or not. But I do have one piece coming up in a newspaper, Cork newspaper this week. So I'm thrilled with that. And again, it was thanks to Conall, who I suppose I had a sense that I wouldn't be able to take on, having to write to newspapers, telling them about the show. And I think it was really, really brilliant decision to actually take that off the table. But going to Edinburgh now, I will be going on my own, but I do have support as well. I have friends coming over to see the show. And again, that's great as well, because you can be looking forward to that, and then they can tell you what they think of the show afterwards, and if they think anything should be changed, etc.
Well, I wish I lived closer, because I would be among the audience if I could. Unfortunately, it's a giant ocean away. But I would love to see it. I hope that there will be a future performance somewhere in the States coming at some point. Otherwise, I may just have to take a trip and visit the UK and do my UK tour and make sure that it includes A Rose by Any Other Name. And that is the title of the play. We've been remiss at not sharing the title more often during this episode, but it is called A Rose by Any Other Name. And I love the fact that it plays on your actual name as well, as, obviously the famous quote. And I think it's going to be a smash hit success.
Oh, thanks. Thank you so much, Stephen. And it's as I say, it's been so exciting to share a little bit more in depth, the whole process of writing and putting it on for you and your listeners. So I'm very grateful for that. Thank you.
No, thank you for taking the time to be here with us today. I know it's a very busy time for you. I'm so excited for you, and congratulations again. And I can't wait to hear more about how it all plays out after your run has completed. Before we wrap things up, fellow Quillers, just a little bit of business. Want to mention not to forget to visit the Patreon page and sign up for the special benefits that you can find there. We're also going to be using that page to post things about the shows, also connections to different guests, some of their research, links to certain papers, and details that you can find if you're interested in learning more about certain guests and certain episodes that we have put out. We thank you all for your support. We are making change, fellow Quillers. Even the Oxfordian elites have been scrambling to create new content, attempt to explain what it is they actually do from month to month to advance the cause, and have even included, if you've been paying attention, the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship Conference coming in September will include, hooray, a debate about the future and what kind of plans Oxfordians need to be making in order to finally advance this cause after 100 years. We haven't won the election yet, but we're already making an impact. More details to come about that in a special episode later this month. In the meantime, write to me with your thoughts, concerns, criticisms, suggestions, and more by sending an email to contact@don'tquillthepodcast.com, contact@don'tquillthepodcast.com. Let's keep the conversation going. And here to announce this month's special Quiller of the Month is our own producer, Jake.
Thank you, Stephen, and hello, Quillers. 'Tis I here once again with the honor of announcing the August Quiller of the Month. What is this? Well, it is a monthly giveaway available to everybody who is on the Don't Quill the Messenger Patreon, who is a serial Quiller or higher. That's right. We lowered the requirements to be entered into this monthly contest, so even more people are eligible to win. And in just a moment here, we are going to spin the wheel o' names of all of the eligible Quillers and pick our winner, who will receive a free item of their choosing from the shop. And of course, just the clout that comes with being able to call yourself the Quiller of the Month. So without further ado, for the month of August, the official Quiller of the Month is, hopefully I'm pronouncing this correctly, Heidi Jannsch. Heidi Jannsch, Jannsch. It's a lot of consonants next to one another. Hopefully I did not butcher it. Thank you so much, Heidi. Keep an eye on your email where we will tell you how to claim your winnings. And if you are listening to this and you say, hey, I want to win, I want to be the Quiller of the Month, then you got to head over to don'tquillthepodcast.com, click the Patreon link, and become a serial Quiller or higher. Thanks to all of our current patrons for your continued support. Now, Stephen, wrap this show up. People have fringe shows to go to.
Thank you, Jake, for all you do to make my life easy and keep the episodes coming. Watch Quillers for a special live-streamed event featuring Jake and me, providing all of you with a behind-the-scenes look into what it takes to provide interesting episodes and special content to you every month. We'll be sharing some funny moments and some struggles, and we'll take some questions as part of what is going to be our September lineup, so watch for us to announce that live stream event featuring Jake and me coming soon. Once again, I'd like to thank my guest, Rosemary Laughlin, break a leg, Rosemary. I know you're going to be a great success. And until next time, fellow Quillers, say it with me out loud so that your coworkers, your neighbors, fellow drivers in other vehicles, workout partners at the gym, or whoever is around you while you're listening to this episode right now, say it out loud so they can hear you. 1, 2, 3, keep asking questions.
If you've enjoyed today's episode, please leave a rating and review in your podcast player. For even more, visit our website, don'tquillthepodcast.com. There you can find official merchandise in our shop, as well as a link to our Patreon. This show is made possible by people like you. We hope you'll consider showing your support by becoming a monthly patron, where you'll receive bonus material and tons of exclusive perks. You can also join in the conversation on our Discord and by following us at Don't Quill the Pod on all social media. All of this can be found at don'tquillthepodcast.com, don'tquillthepodcast.com.
It's Dragon Wagon.